Welcome to Clocked In, the podcast where work works for people, not the other way around. We're Kristen and Ashley, and every week we dive into what's really going on in today's workplaces. From hybrid headaches to hiring trends, culture clashes to quiet quitting. Whether you're an HR pro, a people manager, or just someone trying to make sense of your 9 to 5, we've got the conversations that matter and the strategies to help you build a better workplace. So grab your coffee, clock in, and let's get to work.
All right, welcome to this week's episode of Clocked In. This week, we are going to attempt to answer a question that I'm sure every individual has asked themselves at some point. Should I quit my job? So we are your hosts. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Ashley.
So Ashley, I know both of us have switched jobs and now even careers at this point. So was it pretty clear to you when it was time to move on and find something else?
Yeah, I would say so. Now, that doesn't mean that I always acted right away on it, but I think I would say that I knew that it was time to move on each time. So even though I knew there was still that desire for what's my 5-step plan as a type A person, I wanted to have it all laid out, and that wasn't always the case. But deep down, I knew when it was time to move on. What about you?
So I think I'm definitely the same way. I think I've cried just about every time that I have resigned. So it's always a bigger emotional decision for me if whether or not I'm going to stay at a job or leave, because most of the time I have good connections at my job. So it's very hard for me to make that decision. A lot of times to even start looking for other jobs. And then when I recently switched full careers a few years ago, that was a huge decision for me. And I think that there are people that are chronic job hoppers, and that's maybe a topic for another time. But I think a lot of times people put a lot of weight on the decision of do I stay at my current company or do I go? So let's look at what other people have to say about when it's time to know when it's time to leave. So, our first article today is appropriately named Should You Leave Your Job? And this was posted by the Harvard Business Review in 2023. And really, the author of this article goes over some key decision points that you can make when deciding to leave your job. But really, she points out that it's really a cost benefit analysis. So, looking at the cost of staying as well as the cost of leaving. And she really kind of reframes it as the way of quitting shouldn't necessarily be seen as a failure because sometimes moving on can help you reach your goals a lot faster. But Ashley, what were your key takeaways from this article?
Yeah, as someone who really has had to wrestle through career changes and job changes and knows what it's like to deal with the uncertainty and the fear and the what ifs and all those kinds of emotions that come with this big decision, I think one of my key takeaways from this article was when she talks about how good decision making always involves considering the costs of not taking action. I think it's really easy for us to get bogged down into, well, is this job going to be better or worse? Or what if it doesn't work out? Or what if I'm just as unhappy there? Or what if my new boss is horrible? Or what if nobody invites me to lunch? And all those sorts of things. But there is a cost associated with not taking action as well. And that's been a big thing that I've seen in my career as well, where it's just like, you could stay put. You could grind it out. You could stay where you are and not make a change. And it might be comfortable and safer feeling, but there's also a cost with that, right? Maybe it's a bad work environment. Maybe it's poor mental health as a result of that environment. Maybe it's a lack of career advancement opportunities, which has not only personal development implications, but financial implications. And so considering changing a job or changing careers really does need to involve both the potential drawbacks but also what are those potential things that you could gain from making this move, right? We usually move jobs because we think something's going to be better at the next place. So we have to consider both the cost of taking the action, but also the cost of staying stuck where we are and not taking action at all. And so I think that really just boils down to calculated risk taking, right? Are we doing our best, doing our research, getting the information that we can in order to make the best decision with the information that we have available, knowing that we're never going to have all the information that we wish we had. We don't get that magic ball about how's it going to work out? Are you going to be fulfilled? Is it going to be great or is it going to be horrible? We just can't know that. But we can do calculated activities that help us get a clearer picture of what's the role, what's the culture like. Is this a place that I could see myself growing in the short term, in the long term? And then taking those calculated risks, knowing that it's going to feel scary to make a leap, but that's okay. If you've done your homework, you can feel confident in your ability to make the next thing work or to figure out something else, right? Like if that next job doesn't prove to be better in the way that you thought it would, that's okay. You can pivot again. And like you have the ability to figure it out and, work through that as it arises and not just get bogged down in getting stuck where you are because you were willing to take those risks. And so I think there's a lot that can be done to help with this. But have you seen this play out in your own life as well?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And while you were talking, one thing that kept coming to mind was, the term opportunity cost. So what is it going to cost you to not do something? What are you giving up? I think thinking back to, I think it's marketing or the management classes, they would always talk about the opportunity cost. And so I think in this case, I think back, someone once told me like sometimes you have to move out in order to move up in a company. And so but it always is such a big decision for me because I always get caught up in, is it going to be the wrong decision? Or what if the things that I don't like about my current job that I'm trying to get away from, what if they're worse at the next job that I'm going to go to? And so sometimes I get just stuck in a cycle and usually have to be pushed out of that to make a decision. But I think what I really like about this article, the author Holly Bauer, I think is how you say her last name, she references a book that I know both of us have read called 2 Weeks Notice. And one of the key things is, she's like, give yourself, she's always like a runway is what she calls it, and to make yourself feel more prepared for switching that job. And for me, I know we're both avid planners. I think that that really helps of one, like setting a date and having that goal, but then also saying like, how can I feel more comfortable with taking on that risk? Because for me, I'm a very risk adverse person. I just do not like taking any sort of risk or any unknowns. And so I think now the good thing is that there's so many different ways that we can do our research about companies. We can think, for example, and I talk about this in one of my classes that I teach is how can you do research about a company that you're going to? And so using sites that are available now to actually look and see and get an idea of what their culture is, what employees find positive and negative. I think that can go a long way in helping someone like me feel more comfortable with making that decision or at least having questions to ask during the interview process. So I feel like I can make the best educated decision, which is important, I think.
Yeah, and for me, I think building on that as a fellow planner is that desire to have a financial cushion. If I know that I have an extra little bit of money saved, if I feel like it really kind of gives me more opportunities to maybe take a risk, not reckless. Again, we're talking about calculated risk taking, but like knowing, hey, I have a few months of expenses saved up, or I have a couple of months of rent available so that if something doesn't work out as I thought, or maybe I do switch jobs and then there's like a delay getting paid and I kind of miss a paycheck in there, for example, that financial cushion is a really practical thing that can help making the decision to move, knowing that you have some financial stability versus if you're paycheck to paycheck and then the idea of a different pay scale, or sorry, not pay scale, but like pay timeline, meaning, oh, now you may not have a check for an extra week that you weren't expecting. That can be really stressful in deciding to move jobs as well. But I think as well, one of the things that really helps in knowing whether or not you should leave or stay is getting clear on what are your motivations and your goals behind thinking about this new option. So is that urge to quit really rooted in like, an emotional situation? Is it a situation that you're facing at work with a certain colleague or manager? Is it strategic? Are you thinking that job may be better for me and provide other opportunities that this one doesn't have? Really getting clear on what is it that is driving this decision. And then that can help you as you weigh these options. Because if you think about it, we're all going to have bad days at work or people that irritate us, or that's not the way I would do that kind of thing. But is this urge to quit a random feeling that just pops up, or is it a sense of dread every day as you're thinking about going to the office or driving into work, for example? So, what are you seeking out of that next role? Maybe it's strategic growth. Maybe it's a better culture. Maybe it's more autonomy in how you do your work or a hybrid schedule. Like, there's a lot of things that can motivate people to look for another job. And sometimes it's leaving a bad situation where they are. And sometimes it's just a desire for something better or different that better matches that season of life. And I think we've seen this with friends kind of reevaluating career choices as they have kids or as their kids' needs change and things like that. And so it doesn't just have to be family things, even personal. As you realize as you grow, like, hey, maybe what I wanted in my 20s looks different in my 30s. And that's kind of what something I mentioned in our intro podcast episode is that what I've wanted out of a career has changed over time. And that makes me look for different options and for different things related to future jobs.
Yeah, and I think before we go into our next article, something very important that I think that you called out that I have struggled with throughout my career is I always feel like there's finality in my decision. So if I decide to leave, then I have to stay at that new organization for at least 3 years before I can switch again. When in reality, while I'm not a big fan of the chronic job hoppers that I mentioned earlier, and I think that can maybe damage your career long term, depending on how the economy and things are, there's always a chance to change your mind. So if you make a decision and it's not what you think, you're not stuck there. So you can always leave. And obviously, if somebody else is going to hire you, even after you just started somewhere else, then they're fine with it. And so I think once I kind of grasped that and changed my mindset and reframed it of no decision work related is final. I can always do something else. I can always change my mind. I can always find another job. It helps me feel more comfortable with actually moving forward. And a lot of times it ends up being a great opportunity that I would have missed otherwise.
Yeah, it makes me think of some wise words that my second boss out of college said to me once. And she said, very few things in life can't be undone. And there are some things that are that way. But when it comes to job hopping or job changes, I agree with you. I don't think this is one of them. Like, sure, you may be in that role for a while you look for something else or something like that, but like, it's not final. It's not a life sentence. It's not the role you have to stay in until the end of time unless you want to. And so, just reminding yourself of that, like, yes, do the research, make those calculated risk assessments and kind of deciding what are you looking for, weighing risks versus regret. Like, are you okay taking a risk and knowing that maybe it's great, maybe it doesn't work out the way you want to, but you'll learn something from it regardless. Some risk is necessary for growth, but not all risk is worth it. So, what is that worst case scenario? Can you live with it? What is it going to cost you to stay as well as a different kind of flip side of that coin? So, if a job is draining your health or your confidence or it's in conflict with your values or your ethics, like that's a risk too. And so, thinking through it, yes, make a good decision with the information you have, but knowing that it doesn't have to be permanent and you can pivot again in the future has really helped me as well. The second article we want to talk about is similar to this, and it's aptly named Should You Quit Your Job? 5 Signs That It's Time to Hand in Your Resignation. So, this was article came out a couple years ago, 2023. Obviously, quitting was very popular. We had trends like the Great Resignation and things like that around that time. And so, this article starts by asking the important question of whether or not that the issues that you're facing at work are they temporary or are they really an issue. And we kind of talked about this in the last one too. Is this a a kind of short-term issue, a one-off issue, or is this an ongoing chronic problem? And then the article kind of outlines a few reasons of why you should quit a job. And the ones that it mentions are a lack of growth opportunities, which is huge for especially younger generations, ethical or legal conflicts with either the work or people at work, challenging leadership, a loss of passion, and an impact on mental health. So, those are the five reasons that that author outlined for why you should leave a job. And talking about if you are ready to quit, what should you do? So, Kristen, what was your thoughts? What are your thoughts on this article?
Yeah, so I thought that the reasons they gave for quitting were very valid. I think some of them might be more based on temporary issues, such as, you're losing passion or motivation for your job, or maybe even some of the stress that comes along with your job. Those may be more temporary in nature, versus some things like challenging leadership. That may be more long term. I think it's really important to, when you're making a decision to quit or not, kind of look at those things of, is this temporary, or are there things that are happening in my own personal life that are aiding to the stress of this job that are just temporary, that once those goes away, I'll be able to focus more on work and it won't seem as bad. Versus things that are just completely outside of your control. Like often, the leadership of the organization, there's really nothing that the average worker can do to change that. And sometimes even your boss, you won't be able to change their behaviors as well. So for me, my big takeaway was really looking at whether or not something is temporary or if it is a permanent implication of staying at that job, or a permanent problem that you'll have to face, and really weighing those two things. And so if it's temporary, is it so bad that it's going to cause you to leave? Or is it, if I can just get through the next few months, things will even out. Maybe I'll work on a new project and it'll be more motivating for me. And then you won't give up all the other aspects of the job that you love. So for me, the big takeaway was really balancing, is this a temporary situation or are these things beyond my control? And I think if there's things that really just don't sit well with you at a job that are beyond your control, that could be a good sign for me to, it's time to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's only so much you can do within kind of your span of control at work. And so really thinking through, is this a temporary or a long-term issue, and what level of impact can you have, right? Like, is this something that is just kind of outside of your control and that you're just going to have to either deal with or find something else to know to move on? I think for me, the one part that really stood out was just those mentioning that the ethical complications can be a reason to move on. And I think there, first of all, I mean, there is a difference between legal issues and ethical issues. And so the legality of work should be like the baseline, but sometimes our ethics go beyond that. And so something that may be legal may not be ethical for us. And I think that this is really important for people to consider, and something that doesn't get talked about enough is like when there's a misalignment of values, that can become like an ethical dilemma for you. And so, like, I've had situations in my previous work experience where something, it was legal, like, there was nothing illegal about the action, but it just didn't set right with me. It felt like it was a misalignment with my values of something that was policy at this organization. And so, I think that that can be a really strong motivator to leave, in the sense that, like you were saying, is there something you can do to change this? In my case, no. Like, I had to go along with the way it was established, the standard operating procedures there. But it really bothered me, and it didn't feel like genuine and aligned with the values that I held. And so for me, it really came down to, I have a choice to make. I can stay in this job and do things their way, or I can look for something elsewhere because they're not going to change on this. Other people don't seem to have the same problem with this that I have. So it's a me issue in that
Yeah.
regard. And like, I am not going to change their opinion on it as a company. And so the choice is either put up with it or look for something else. And so I think when we think about our values, sometimes you don't always even like have them written down per se. Like but when you experience something, you come across it, you're like, oh, that doesn't feel right. Like that doesn't seem genuine or true to who I am or the way I see
Mhm.
things or what's important to me or my approach to a certain task or job duty. And so thinking about it in that way is really powerful when it comes to deciding to leave and knowing that hey, I need to build that cushion. I need to look for other options. I need to kind of take those next steps because this feels out of alignment with me and they're not going to change. So it's up to me to make a change and they'll find somebody else who doesn't have a problem with that kind of issue or that kind of approach to the work.
Yeah. And I think that's really important as well because I get hung up with that aspect as well of like it being an emotional decision of, oh, what's going to happen when I leave? But what you said is so key is that they will find somebody else. Like there's always somebody else that can do your job, in the especially obviously within a workplace, maybe not in some outside circumstances, but I think that was a very key and kind of takes the stress off of it for me of yes, I am even if I'm doing a great job and I'm making an impact where I'm at, if there are some things like the value misalignment, that's kind of a non-negotiable, I think, for so many people because your values and your morals are really ingrained into who you are, and that's not something that you can easily just go against. And I think that could be a really, really tough decision. And I remember one time as I was working in training, and they were trying to push a training program that, from almost like an ethical perspective, but definitely like a values perspective, just I did not agree with. And I think it was the only time in my career where because I'm, again, I'm very conflict adverse, so you know this about me, but I had to stand up and say, like, I do not agree with what you're trying to do here. Like, I don't think that it's right, and this is not something that I will do. And thankfully, it became kind of a non-issue over time. But I remember thinking, if this is, but at the same time, it's very eye-opening for me. So I was like, if this is the type of work that they're going to try to move towards, this is maybe not going to be an alignment for me in the future. But it was a very hard decision to have that conflict, but it also was a very clear cut of this is going against who I am as a person. So, I'm going to have to go because, like you said, the company is not going to change what they're doing. And sometimes that's a hard thing to come to terms with as well, is that it can be very hard to make upward change in a lot of cases. So,
Yeah, and it really emphasizes just the power of the culture and that people have a choice and whether they stay or they leave. And there's a lot that organizations can and should do to help employees and help with employee retention. But sometimes there's just kind of like line in the sands where it's just, and the hard part with that is it's not the legal issues, right? I think the legal issues can be a lot more black and white. But when you get into values misalignment, it feels like a grayer area. You know you're in conflict with it, but other people don't seem to mind it. And so it's kind of like, well, is the problem me? Like, is this just a me issue, or is this really something that I just can't continue on with? All right, so our last article of the day, we're going to be talking about why are people really leaving? And this one was so interesting to me because it showed some disconnects between what people say and the reality. So I recently found this article was published in 2025 all about why employees quit. And the top reasons that were cited were one, a toxic workplace environment, two, poor company leadership, and three, conflict with a manager or supervisor. And oh man, there's a lot to unpack here. I think it's so interesting that almost a third of the people reported that a toxic workplace environment was the reason that they were leaving. And I think that's interesting partially with just like the culture and more of an influence or impact of like comments about mental health. And I think toxic gets thrown around a lot. And what does that mean? Does it just mean I don't like somebody, or I don't like that they're having expectations of me as a worker? And now I'm just going to think of it as a toxic workplace. But then I hear and read examples of lots of really bad things happening in the workplace that really does make it seem like a toxic environment. And so I think my key takeaway from this article was that employees are not just quitting jobs, they're quitting bad environments and poor leadership. Kristen, what were some of your thoughts on this one?
Well, our favorite saying when it comes to this that we both learned in graduate school from one of our dear advisors is it's always a management problem. And I used this example in class just this week, and the students kind of looked at me like I was crazy. And I remember feeling the same way when, at the time, the professor said that to me in our class. I remember it was like an org development class or something that we were taking or change management, but I remember very clearly she was like, it's always a management problem. And at the time I was like, no, there's so many different things that can go wrong in an organization. And then I really started to develop my career, and then I'm like, she is right. It is always a management problem. Because either they're being poor leaders or they're allowing toxic behavior to continue in the workplace when they're the ones that can control it. And so this does not surprise me at all. I can think I think like the work that I was doing was always an aspect of why I chose to leave, but the main driving factors became like the people maybe I was working with or the leadership in the company. I know in one case, like a new leader had came in and I just didn't like the direction he was taking the company, and it kind of shifted the whole culture away from what it was. And it was really difficult to see, especially working in HR. And we had such a great team and really prided ourselves in developing a culture that employees felt, welcome and engaged. And it was a really fun place to work. But then new leadership kind of came in and it was such a shift. And that's something that unfortunately it takes a long time to build and can so easily be broken when you're talking about culture. And so, yeah, this does not surprise me at all. And I think the leadership and the toxic environment is maybe one of the best reasons to leave a job, because it's something that it goes back to it's probably not temporary unless you have a leadership change for the positive, but it's outside of your control. So what are you going to do about it? Unless you are in a position of power, or you are in HR and you have key influence in the culture. Outside of that, there's probably not going to be any big impact. But I also think it speaks to the importance of managers within the organization. So even if you know that there's a change or a shift, maybe even not for the positive within your organization, managers are so often the gatekeepers of that. So even if things are going kind of crazy in the organization, within your team, you can still have a very positive culture. And I hope that more managers start to see the important role that they play and how that impacts people's personal lives as well as professional, but it can directly impact the employee retention and someone's decision to stay or to go.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of touches on something that I really found interesting in this article as well, which was the percentage of companies that thought workers were leaving due to these conditions. So you remember about 33% of employees cited the reason they left was that toxic workplace environment. But according to this article, only 15% of employers surveyed thought that employees were leaving due to a toxic workplace environment. So this implies that leadership is either woefully unaware or unwilling to address rotten workplace culture, and it's driving away talent. And so I thought that was such an interesting finding of this study because it really does show this disconnect. And on the one hand, because it's always a management problem, I'm like, well, companies should know, right? Like you should be trying to be better, trying to make a workplace more a workplace environment more friendly and welcoming. And ready to do the work and you'll work hard, but not be a toxic culture. But at the same time, if they don't think that's why people are leaving, either one, they have their head in the sand, or two, they just don't care, right? And I'm thinking like, a lot of companies do exit interviews when people leave. So I think it might point to the fact that people are giving different reasons. Like maybe they're afraid to speak up, and it makes sense, right? If you have a toxic workplace environment and it's already difficult for you to do your job, why would you be motivated to speak up and tell why you're leaving if it's that bad environment to start with?
Mhm.
And so, according to employers in this article, the top reasons that the employees gave for why they were quitting were personal conflict, such as health or family issues, a better job offer that would advance their career goals, or unsatisfactory pay. Those were kind of the top three. So, I think part of it might be like those kind of feel like more um, kosher reasons to give to leave a job. Like it makes sense. You can kind of understand why somebody would leave if they have got a personal conflict or they're wanting better pay somewhere else or a different job opportunity versus saying, oh, well, I'm leaving because this place is toxic and the managers are treating people horribly and all of that. And so I think that if people are leaving due to poor leadership or toxic management, they're going to be uncomfortable discussing that. And so then that kind of raises the issue of should employers know? Like, should they perceive or pay attention to trends and see, like, hey, something deeper is going on? Or do you think that they're okay just getting those answers about, well, it's all about pay or a better career opportunity elsewhere, as if, like, oh, there's nothing we can do about that? What are your thoughts on that, Kristen?
Yeah, so it kind of was laughing internally at some of the things that you said there of like they're either just unaware or maybe they don't want to know. I think part of it is for especially leaders higher up, they probably don't want to admit that their company is toxic, and that's why employees are leaving. But also I was laughing at the generic responses of, a better work opportunity. Um, that could cover a number of reasons why somebody is leaving. Like, yes, it may be better pay or maybe a higher job title, but it could just be that the environment is different or the leadership is better. And so I think, you mentioned exit interviews. I think those are some of the most powerful tools that a company can use as far as to really figure out why employees are leaving. And I've seen it kind of done two ways, like where either you'll just send out a survey or you'll send out a survey and then you'll business partner will meet with HR business partner will actually meet with the person to talk through it. But I think something you said is so true is a lot of times employees don't want to be honest about what the problem is. And it's either because, they always want to leave that door open, like, boomerang employee effect is certainly something to consider. But also, if people are on their way out, I would have to imagine that at some point they've tried to bring up these concerns and address them. And obviously, they've not been addressed. So that's why they're leaving. So I think some employees just get to the point where they're like, why would I be honest now? What is the difference? And I know that we've had that conversation before of, well, if I am going to leave this job, like how honest should I be in the exit interview? Is it going to do more damage to my personal reputation if I am honest? Are they going to believe me? And really, a big issue with surveys in general is are they going to do anything with the information that I have given them? So I'm not surprised that there's a disconnect between why employers think employees are leaving and why they're actually leaving as well. It's not surprising to me at all. But so I recently, and I know Reddit has been around for a long time, but Ashley, have you ever spent any time on Reddit?
I do get sucked into Reddit rabbit holes occasionally.
Yeah.
Got to hear
So
what the
I have
giggle.
avoided Reddit until very recently, and it is quite addicting. So now I spend way too much time on there, but I thought it would be interesting to see like why people say that they're actually leaving a job, right? So we know we have the research side of it that says toxic environments, managers, different things like that. But I feel like it really gives you firsthand accounts and the truth. So maybe the things that they're not saying in the exit interviews, they're going to say on Reddit, especially because it's anonymous sometimes. So someone posted a question about how do you know when it's time to quit your job? Very on target with what we're talking about. And one person just said, when you start asking questions like this, you know it's time. So if you're questioning if it's time to leave, when do you know it's time? Some people said when the money is no longer worth your suffering. I think if you're using words like suffering, that's a red flag. It's time to go. When you're not happy on a regular basis, life's too short to be unhappy about something that you can change. I really thought that was a good point. Like you're in control a lot of times of where you work, and I know it's not as easy as just deciding that you're going to job and you can instantly go out and get a new one. But um, let's see, like a lot of them noted like mental health. Some of them were pretty drastic of really just feeling like trapped and being in a dead-end job and you're not feeling fulfilled at work. And so I really think a lot of kind of those red flags that they were calling out were definitely things that I've seen in my career as well. So kind of what's your reaction to some of those responses that they gave? And then what are your red flag moments of that you say, yes, it is now time for me to leave and look for a new job?
Yeah, I was struck by the number of negative responses on this answer. It was really like kind of pulling at the heartstrings for me. I know that people complain about work all the time, and that's not new, but when you read like some of the comments you read out, or like when you have crippling anxiety, or one person
Mhm.
even said, when I was wishing for something horrible to happen to me so I didn't have to go to work. And I'm just like, oh man, like there's got to be a better way, right? Like if we need money to live and we want to be fulfilled in our jobs and we want to work hard and do good work, but like man, how do you know when to leave a job? And like the instant response is all these negative things and like
Mhm.
really kind of dark, deep negative things. And so that just really kind of pulled at my heartstrings there. But I just think we need to remember that you can leave a job for a good reason or a bad reason. Or no reason, I guess technically, but yes, it's easy to think about all the negatives of what you want to get away from with a job, but it's also important to think about what are you running to, right? Are you just running away from a problem? Or are you trying to better yourself or be in a better environment or have better growth opportunities in some other capacity? And so I think when is it time to leave a job? Red flags, definitely a lot of the ones we've talked about. The big ones I've seen in my own life are the ethical and values misalignment, like we talked about, a lack of growth opportunity. There have been jobs where there was nowhere to go but where I was. And so it's like, I remember. I remember when someone said this to me, and I was kind of offended, to be honest, at first. I was young in my career and was excited about a new role that I was taking. And this person, much older, presumably wiser, like more experienced, I guess I should say, in the career field, said to me, "You're going to outgrow that role." And I was kind of taken aback because I hadn't even started the role yet. And here you are already raining on my parade. And I was thinking, like, who is this person to like say that to me? And you know, I don't know, you don't have that same like we didn't have a close relationship, so it's not somebody that I was looking to for wisdom or advice or like to speak into my life. And so I was kind of offended when she said it. And she went on to tell me the reasons why I was gonna outgrow that career or that role quickly. And a few years later, her words came back in my head as I was thinking about how, man, she really did call out a lot of things that at the time I just couldn't see would be kind of like a stumbling block to growth professionally. But man, it did certainly did happen that way. And so, like, there were just no new advancement opportunities, no growth opportunities, even within the same role, and things like that. And so, I think for me, that's a big one. Now, that doesn't have to mean that it's all about the ambition and climbing the ladder and getting as high as you can on the corporate ladder, like maybe fresh out of college me would have thought about. like we talked about, there's a lot of different reasons, different priorities, values, things you're looking for in a role kind of shift over time. But for me, the big red flags, if there's no opportunity to grow, that's going to feel very stagnant over time. Because once you get good at your role and it's just like, what am I just supposed to rinse and repeat this for the next 20 years? Like, you want new opportunities, learn new skill sets, meet new people, work together on different projects, etc. And so, on the positive side of these kind of soul crushing comments that Reddit listed, I would point out that growth is a huge one for me, and I think it's something I hear a lot among younger generation as well. Of and then on the flip side, I hear it from businesses too about the skills gap and looking for
Mhm.
people and that they can't find the skills they need. And so I think there's lots of opportunities on both sides, the employee and the employer, to kind of fill in some of those. And that might be a reason to leave a job because some jobs don't want to look for opportunities to develop their current employees as well as they should. What about you, Kristen?
Yeah, so I agree with you that I got so sad when I was reading the reasons why people were leaving their jobs on Reddit because I felt like they were very harsh and very blunt, and a lot of them were just very sad. But I also think they really captured some of the main reasons for me when I know that it is time to leave a job, and along with the growth opportunities, like you called out, I think that is a really key one. But for me, like I always have a hard time of separating work and life. So if I'm having a bad day at work, it's really hard for that not to trickle into my home life. And I admire and am honestly very jealous of those people that are like, oh, once I leave the office or I turn off my computer, that's it. I don't think about work anymore. That is not my personality. And so once, and you're going to have, again, it goes back to temporary versus permanent. And you're going to have those bad days at work, and that's going to happen. But when it becomes so often that you're just always in a bad mood because of work, and work is continuing to add additional stress to you, and it's impacting your family time and your, personal time. For me, that is like the biggest red flag. And so if I start noticing in my own conversations with people, if all I can talk about is negative aspects that are happening at work, that's a big moment of I either need to adjust my attitude, find a way to work around it at work, or I need to look for something else because this for me is not healthy. And so for me, it's if I'm no longer able to really separate that work and life, or I feel so overworked, that's just a key time for me when it's time to leave. But I actually have kind of it's funny now that we are years past this situation, but I was thinking, oh, if you're so overworked that you fall asleep on your way to work, that's a clear red flag and you should quit. But that actually happened, and I do not advocate for doing this, but it was several years ago, and I actually was on vacation for my birthday with my mom and my sisters. Actually, I don't know if I've actually ever told you this. Maybe I have. But anyways, so we were actually all in Cancun on a girls' trip, and my husband called and said, "Oh, I just quit my job, and it just was time for me to go." And I knew that he had been having issues, and actually, you know this, that like him and I are very different personalities when it comes to making decisions. I agonize about them for a long time, and he does not. So, he what it was honestly not, and we're talking about it's always a manager problem. It was not a good fit for him. He honestly wasn't a good fit for the job, which is something completely different, but the job was definitely not a good environment really for anybody there, in my opinion. But he was like, yeah, I was working. He had been working such long hours, and he's like, I was driving into work and I fell asleep because been continually having to work, work, work. I mean, he would go work in the office at the time all day and then come home, eat dinner, and then work, 3 or 4 more hours at night just because that was the expectation of them. And so I was like, yeah, well, that is a good reason. If you're falling asleep because you're so overworked on the way to work, that is a clear sign to leave. Although I would recommend not doing it if your significant other is out on vacation. Maybe wait until they they get back and you can tell them so that just put a little bit of damper on it. But So, Ashley, what do you think if someone is getting ready to leave or they've made the decision of, I think I'm seeing these red flags, I'm feeling this chronic stress, I need something more challenging at work? What are some things that they can do to help prepare themselves to leave that job or to create that runway that they talk about in the 2 weeks notice book?
Yeah, I think just really getting honest with yourself is so impactful, right? So something can be a good job on paper and not be a good fit for you at that point in your life or your career. And I know I've seen that, and I'm sure you have as well, like kind of just different seasons looking for different things or outgrowing roles in different ways, misalignment, etc. But thinking about, okay, what is it that I'm wanting or that I'm lacking in this current role? So not just what am I trying to escape, but like what opportunities upward and forward am I looking for that I don't have right now? And so thinking through what is it that you're actually wanting so that you make sure you're evaluating. Is this a short-term problem that might resolve itself, or is this a chronic issue that really is going to make you need to leave or look for work elsewhere? So I would say getting honest with yourself. What are those problems? What are you hoping out of the next one is key. Because otherwise, I feel like you'll just repeat the same situation you're in. If you look for the same role you're in now, you might get stunted growth and the new place as well. So, getting honest is a good first step. Updating your resume, right? Keeping a list of what are those projects and successes that you've had in your current role. How can you talk about them well in an interview, on a resume? And I find it's easier to keep your resume updated as you're working instead of as you sit down when you're looking for a job and trying to remember all the things you've done and the successes that you've seen in your role. So, updating a resume is a good tool. Um, Reaching out to your network. So, especially if you're looking to maybe kind of make a pivot into a different area of your career field or a different career altogether, talking to people, learning more about their roles, do those informational interviews. What can you tell me? Can I buy you coffee? Can we talk about what you do so that I can get a better feel for if this is something that might be a good fit for me career wise? Whether that's a specific job or a company's culture, things like that. And then definitely do your research. So you want to know like what you can find out as much as you can about your perception of a company. Is it accurate, right? So like looking at those review sites that you mentioned, like Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and seeing what are people saying about those companies' culture, because it's easy to have an idea from the outside and that may not be the reality, right? So doing your research in terms of different job titles you might could search for, in terms of pay expectations for your region for that kind of job title, the growth of that field, what kinds of kind of industry happenings are going on, what things might you want to kind of highlight on a resume or an interview to show that you're up to speed in your area. And then finding out from employees when possible, even those websites where it allows them to kind of rate their company anonymously. Goes back to that article where we talked about what people say why they leave is very different from what the company hears about why they're leaving. So looking for places where people are being honest about what is it like to work there, and then help you decide if that's a place that you might be interested in working or applying or continuing an application process or interviewing, etc. And then just doing what you can to create that runway. So, can you save up a little bit of money to kind of give you a buffer? Can you call on different connections that you might have? Can you make a plan towards your exit? Knowing that there's a lot in the job search process that's outside of your control, but what you can do as an applicant in terms of finding jobs that are related, tailoring your resume, and going through the application process.
Yeah, I agree. I think keeping a resume updated is the number one thing that you can do because you never know when it may be time to leave or when another opportunity may approach you. Now, that's the great thing. If you're on LinkedIn, you may get a message before you even try to apply for another job. I know I would always try to update mine every time I would do like a performance review, having to think through everything you've done that year. So it was really easy. While it's on my mind, I'm going to just go ahead and update my resume as well. But I think one of the key things that you called out is to kind of know yourself, know what you're looking for, identify the problems that you have at your current place, and figure out ways, whether it's doing research on Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and looking for those specific things. So if you're experiencing manager issues now, how can you avoid going to a place that has manager issues? Or if it's something to do with your, the schedule that you need to work and you don't need to, you need to be done at 5 o'clock. What are some questions that you can ask during the interview to make sure that it's going to give you that work-life balance that you need? So I think to me, that's the biggest thing that you can do when it's time to leave is be very clear on what you want in your next role and then take the steps to actually determine whether or not you're going to get that at a company even before you interview with them.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. Thanks for joining us for the Clocked In podcast. Make sure you hit subscribe so that you'll never miss an episode. We're clocking out. See you next time.